You wake up to the stench of blood mixed with sand. The air is thick, so thick you can taste it. Iron, sweat, the acrid bitterness of fear that clings to your tongue like ash. Your hands are trembling, but you don't know if it's from the cold stone beneath you or the roar that shakes the very ground you stand on. 50,000 voices, 50,000 throats screaming for something you cannot give them. Glory, entertainment, death. You're standing in the Colosseum, but you're not a spectator. You're the spectacle. The sand beneath your feet is not golden. It is dark, stained with the lives of men who stood exactly where you stand now. Men who believed, perhaps, that they could survive. Men who were wrong. The dust rises with every breath, every heartbeat, and you realize something terrible. This is not a place of honor. This is a slaughterhouse dressed in marble. You are a gladiator. But that word, gladiator, it doesn't mean what you thought it did. It doesn't mean warrior. It doesn't mean hero. It means condemned. It means slave. It means criminal dragged from a cell and thrust into the light, blinking, broken, given a sword and told to make your death worth watching. Some of you volunteered. Can you imagine that? Desperation so deep that you signed your name in blood, traded your freedom for the promise of coin, of fame, of survival. But here, in this arena, all promises are lies. The crowd doesn't see you. They see a body, a performance, a thing that bleeds. And you realize, as the gate behind you groans open and something steps into the light, armor glinting, eyes hollow, that you are not here to live. You are here to teach them a lesson they will never speak aloud, that civilization is built on the bones of the forgotten. What kind of life must a man live when death itself becomes entertainment? You didn't start here. No one starts in the sand. The arena is the end of a long, slow death that began the moment you were taken. Captured, sold, condemned. Most gladiators were slaves, men seized in Rome's endless wars, dragged across borders in chains, their names replaced with numbers, their histories erased. You might have been a farmer once, a father, a soldier who fought on the wrong side. It doesn't matter now. Rome doesn't care who you were. It only cares what you can become. Others were criminals, murderers, thieves, deserters, men whose punishment was not execution, but something slower, something more profitable. The state could kill you quickly, but why waste a body that could bleed for profit? So they sent you here instead, to the Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiator school in Rome, a prison disguised as a training ground. And some, God's help them, some volunteered, debtors who signed contracts they couldn't read, free men so desperate, so broken by poverty, that they traded their liberty for the promise of food, shelter, and the slim, impossible hope of glory. They walked into the ludus with their heads high. They did not walk out the same men. Inside those walls, you were stripped, not just of your clothes, but of everything that made you human. Your name became a title, Thraex, Murmillo, Retiarius. Your body became a weapon. Your will became obedience. They fed you barley and beans to make you strong, but never strong enough to resist. They trained you to kill, but never to think. You were broken, reshaped, molded into something that could bleed beautifully, because that's what Rome needed. Not warriors, not heroes, living weapons, bodies that could make the crowd forget their own emptiness, if only for an afternoon. The nightmare didn't begin in the arena. It began the moment you realized you were no longer yourself. You were property, and property exists only to be used. The training begins before dawn. You wake to the crack of a whip against stone, to the bark of the lanista, the man who owns you now. He is your master, your father, your executioner. He will teach you how to kill, yes, but more importantly, he will teach you how to die. Because in the arena, death is not failure. Death is performance. They hand you a wooden sword, a rudis, but it is not light. It is heavier than steel, designed to make your arms scream, to make your muscles remember pain so deeply that when they finally give you a real blade, it will feel like mercy. You swing it until your shoulders tear, until your hands bleed, until you can no longer tell where your body ends and the weapon begins. They feed you barley mash, beans, gruel thick enough to choke on, not to nourish you, but to bulk you, to make your flesh dense, your body a spectacle of muscle and mass. You are not being made strong. You are being made visible. A body the crowd can see suffer from the highest seats. The beatings are constant, not punishment, conditioning. Every strike teaches you that resistance is pointless, that obedience is survival, that you are clay, and the lanista is the sculptor, and his only design is suffering shaped into entertainment. You learn the styles: Thrax with his curved sword and small shield, Murmillo with his heavy helmet and gladius, Retiarius with his net and trident, exposed, vulnerable, desperate. Each style is a script, each movement choreographed not for victory, but for drama. They teach you how to fall, how to raise your hand in surrender, how to tilt your head so the blade enters cleanly, so your death is quick and beautiful and doesn't bore the crowd. They teach you that your life is not yours. It belongs to the roar, to the thumbs raised or turned, to the emperor's whim. You are reshaped, molded, no longer a man, but a thing that bleeds on command. And yet, even here, in the shadow of the whip, in the silence between screams, whispers linger. Whispers of rebellion. They bought you, not metaphorically, literally. Your body, every scar, every muscle, every breath still left in your lungs was purchased, appraised, valued in denarii like grain, like cattle, like wine shipped from Gaul. A trained gladiator could cost a fortune, thousands of sesterces. More if you had survived a few fights. If you knew how to make the crowd lean forward in their seats. If your blood looked good on sand. The lanista who owned you was not a warrior. He was a businessman, and you were his investment. The economics were precise, brutal, efficient. If you died too early, if some novice got lucky and drove a blade through your throat in your first match, the lanista could file a claim. Insurance contracts existed for this. Insurance against human death, as if your life were no different than a broken cart or a shipment lost at sea. The wealthy sponsored games to win votes, to display power, to remind the mob who controlled the bread and circuses. Each event cost a fortune. Gladiators were rented, leased, sometimes bought outright for a single afternoon of slaughter. The crowd never saw the contracts. They only saw the blood. To them, your death was priceless, a transcendent moment of drama and release. But to Rome's elite, you were a line item, a cost, a transaction. They calculated how many men would die to satisfy the audience, how many could be wounded and still survive to fight again, how much a corpse was worth versus a cripple. They optimized suffering like architects optimize marble. You were not human anymore. You were commodity, flesh with a price tag. A body that generated profit as long as it could still bleed, still scream, still make the crowd forget their own emptiness for just a few more hours. What does a man become when his blood has a market price? When his final breath is someone else's profit margin? He becomes exactly what Rome needed him to be. Proof that civilization could measure even death and still call itself glorious. The gates open. The crowd erupts. 50,000 voices become one, a sound so massive it doesn't feel like noise anymore. It feels like gravity, like the air itself is crushing you. And you step forward into the light, into the sand, into the gaze of an empire that has gathered to watch you suffer. This is not combat. This is theater. Every match is staged, choreographed, designed not just for death, but for drama. The Murmillo in his heavy helmet and curved shield, plodding forward like a bronze monument. He is paired against the Retiarius, nearly naked, armed only with a net and trident, darting, desperate, exposed. Strength versus speed, armor versus cunning. The crowd leans in, choosing sides, betting coins, screaming for blood. The Thrax with his small shield and curved blade circles the Hoplomachus, who mirrors him like a dark reflection. They are gladiators, yes, but more than that, they are symbols, representations of foreign enemies Rome has conquered. Thracians, Greeks, Gauls. Their deaths in the arena are reenactments, reminders that Rome always wins. But it's not just death they want, it's humiliation. The Retiarius who stumbles, whose net tangles, who falls to his knees, the crowd howls with laughter. The Murmillo, who is too slow, too clumsy, who takes a trident to the thigh and collapses in the dust. They jeer, mock, delight in his failure. Because this is not about honor. This is about watching a man be reduced to nothing while Rome eats honey dates and pretends this is culture. You fight, but you're utterly alone. The crowd is a single beast with 1,000 mouths, and you are the meal. Your opponent is not your enemy. He is just another slave, another body caught in the same machine. The real enemy is above you, around you. The empire itself, feeding on violence like it's bread, like it's worship, like it's the only thing that makes them feel alive. Blood is spectacle. Suffering is ritual. And Rome calls this civilization. Some of them became gods. Not literally, but close. Close enough that the distinction stopped mattering. You see their names scratched into walls across Rome. Graffiti in Pompeii still whispers their fame. Celadus, the Thracian, makes the girls swoon. Crescens, the net fighter, holds the hearts of all the girls. They were celebrities, idols, men whose faces were painted on tavern walls, whose victories were chanted in the streets like hymns. Spiculus was one of them, Emperor Nero's favorite, a gladiator so beloved, so successful, that Nero showered him with palaces, with gold, with gifts fit for senators. When Spiculus entered the arena, the crowd didn't just cheer, they worshipped. He was proof that a slave could transcend his chains, that glory was possible, that if you bled beautifully enough, Rome would love you. Women pursued them. Aristocratic women, bored with their politician husbands, slipped into the gladiator barracks at night, drawn to the danger, the violence, the forbidden thrill of flesh that had killed. These men were untouchable, literally infamia, legally disgraced, socially lower than prostitutes, and yet they were desired, lusted after, made into fantasies. But here is the truth they don't tell you. The glory was a cage. You could win 100 fights. You could have your name carved into marble. You could hear the emperor himself call you magnificent. And still, you were property. You slept in chains. You ate what you were given. You fought when you were told. You died when it pleased them. Glory was not freedom. It was a leash made of gold, a distraction, a way to make you forget that you were still a slave, still a body to be used, still a thing that existed only to entertain the people who owned you. They loved you the way they loved a favorite hunting dog, fiercely, obsessively, but never as an equal, never as human. And when you died, they would mourn you for an afternoon, then by another. You lie in the sand, bleeding. Your sword is gone, your shield shattered. Your opponent stands above you, blade pressed to your throat, waiting. Not for his decision. He has none. For theirs. 50,000 voices. One verdict. You raise your hand. The gesture of surrender. The signal that you have fought well, that you have given them a show, that you deserve mercy. Your breath comes in ragged gasps. The sand beneath you is warm with your own blood. And you wait. This is the moment Rome craves more than the kill itself. The judgment. The emperor rises, or if he is absent, the crowd decides. A gesture, a thumb, pollice verso. Historians still debate what it meant. Turned thumb, raised thumb, hidden thumb. The truth is lost to time, but the horror remains. Your life reduced to a signal, a twitch of a hand, a political calculation. If the emperor is pleased, if you made him laugh, made him gasp, made him feel something other than the crushing boredom of absolute power, he might grant mercy. You live. You are dragged from the sand, stitched together, thrown back into your cell to heal and fight again. But if the crowd is dissatisfied, if your performance was dull, if you fell too quickly, if you failed to bleed dramatically enough, they roar for death. And the emperor, ever the politician, ever the servant of the mob's hunger, turns his thumb. And you die, not because you fought poorly, not because you were weak, but because you failed to entertain. This is the collapse of agency. You have no control, not over victory, not over survival. Your fate is not determined by your skill, your courage, your will to live. It is determined by spectacle, by politics, by whether or not Caesar had a good breakfast. You are not a warrior. You are a puppet, and the strings are held by an empire that calls this justice. And yet, impossibly, defiantly, some dared to refuse. Some dared to defy Rome itself. His name was Spartacus, a Thracian, a slave, a gladiator trained in the ludus of Capua, where men were molded into weapons and told to accept their fate. But Spartacus did not accept. He could not. Something in him, call it rage, call it dignity, call it the last ember of humanity that Rome could not extinguish, refused to be broken. In 73 BCE, he and 73 others seized kitchen knives and fled. Just kitchen knives. That's all they had. And with those, they sparked a rebellion that would shake the Republic to its foundation. They were not an army. They were the desperate, the expendable, slaves, gladiators, the condemned, men who had nothing left to lose because Rome had already taken everything. They raided estates, freed other slaves, gathered followers by the thousands. 10,000, 30,000, 70,000 souls who had been treated as property and finally, impossibly, dared to stand. For 2 years, they fought. They won battles against Roman legions. They defeated generals. They proved that slaves were not just flesh. They were men, capable of strategy, of courage, of defiance that could not be bought or beaten out of them. But Rome does not forgive rebellion. Marcus Licinius Crassus crushed them, not honorably, not quickly. After the final battle in 71 BCE, 6,000 survivors were captured. Spartacus himself likely died in combat, his body never identified, lost among the thousands of corpses. But those 6,000 who surrendered, who begged for mercy, who thought perhaps Rome might show compassion, they were crucified, every single one, nailed to crosses lining the Appian Way, the road from Capua to Rome. 120 miles of dying men, a forest of agony, a message written in flesh. This is what happens when you defy us. It took days for them to die, weeks for the bodies to rot, and Rome called this justice, called this order, called this peace. Rebellion was not hope. It was just another kind of death. When you die in the arena, the show does not stop. Your body is dragged through the sand by men with hooks, iron claws that pierce your flesh and pull you toward the Porta Libidinensis, the gate of death. You leave a dark trail behind you. The crowd barely notices. They are already watching the next match, the next body, the next performance. They strip you. Take anything of value. Armor, weapons, sometimes teeth if they're gold. What remains is waste. Refuse. Meat that no longer serves a purpose. Some bodies are thrown to the beasts. Lions, bears, wolves kept starving in cages beneath the Colosseum. Your flesh becomes their meal, a final act of utility. Other times, you are carted outside the city walls to the mass graves, pits where gladiators, criminals, and animals are dumped together, unnamed, unmourned. No markers, no prayers, just lime and soil and the slow rot of forgotten men. Above, in the emperor's box, senators dine on roasted fowl and honeyed wine. The philosopher Seneca watched the games once and wrote with disgust, "Man, a sacred thing to man, is killed for sport and merriment." He described the noontime executions, the worst slaughter, when the crowd was bored, when condemned men were simply butchered without ceremony, without skill, just hacked apart to fill the time between proper fights. He called it murder, but Rome called it entertainment. The contrast is unbearable. You bled for their pleasure. You died for their applause. And before your body is even cold, they are laughing, eating, betting on the next kill. There is no dignity in this death, no honor, no meaning. You are not a sacrifice. Sacrifices are holy. They are offerings given to gods with reverence, with purpose. You were not offered. You were spent, used up, discarded like broken pottery. And the empire that consumed you did not pause, did not reflect, did not mourn. It simply opened the gates for the next man, and the next, and the next. The sand remembers, long after the Colosseum crumbled, long after the emperors turned to dust and the crowds scattered into history, long after the last gladiator drew his final breath, the sand remembers. It holds the stains, the echoes, The weight of 70,000 lives reduced to entertainment. But here's the question that haunts us, the one we cannot escape. What separates us from Rome? We tell ourselves we are different, civilized, enlightened. We do not gather in stone amphitheaters to watch men kill each other for sport. We do not cheer as bodies are dragged through the sand. We do not measure human life in denarii and applause. And yet, we watch violence. We consume it. We stream it into our homes, our phones, our eyes, packaged as drama, as entertainment, as content. We make celebrities of fighters. We bet on their pain. We dissect their failures and worship their brutality, and we call it sport. We call it art. We call it anything except what it is. The same ancient hunger, dressed in new clothes. Michel Foucault wrote that every society is defined by how it punishes, how it displays power through the body. Rome's power was obvious. Blood on sand, whips in a ludus, crosses lining roads. Ours is subtler, mediated. But is it so different? We still feed on spectacle. We still turn suffering into theater. We still reduce human beings to bodies that perform for our gaze. The gladiators were not monsters. They were men, slaves, fathers, sons, men who wanted to live, who fought because they had no choice, who died because an empire decided their blood was worth less than a moment of distraction. And we, sitting safely in our seats, centuries removed, morally superior, we must ask ourselves, if we had been there in the crowd, would we have turned our thumbs down? Would we have cheered? Would we have walked away? Or would we have stayed transfixed, hungry for just one more death? Sartre said hell is other people. But perhaps hell is not the people themselves. It is their silence, their complicity, their willingness to watch suffering and call it entertainment, to witness cruelty and call it culture. The Colosseum still stands, a ruin, a monument, a warning we refuse to read. And somewhere, in the cracks of that ancient stone, in the dust that was once sand, in the silence between what we remember and what we choose to forget, the gladiators still wait. Not for glory, not for justice, just to be seen, not as spectacle, not as bodies, but as men who lived, who suffered, who died for an empire's amusement. Their blood has long since dried, but the stain remains, on Rome, on history, on us, and the sand remembers everything.